My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm 32 years old. I've always been the kind of man who values calm over conflict, loyalty over noise. I built a steady life, good job in finance, close circle of friends, and after 4 years of dating, I was finally ready to marry the woman I loved. Her name was Elise, and for the longest time I thought our biggest obstacle would be choosing the right venue. I didn't realize it would be my parents, or the war they were quietly preparing behind my back. It happened 2 weeks before the wedding. Everything was nearly done. The dress, the guest list, the flowers. Elise picked out with my mother while I stood on the sidelines smiling, or at least pretending to. My parents had always been strategic, wealthy, proper, and overly involved in anything that bore the Reyes name. Elise came from a simpler background. No generational wealth, no Ivy League legacy, just kindness, intelligence, and grit. My father called her a detour. My mother called her not a Reyes woman. I called her my future. The morning it happened, I walked into my apartment after a meeting to find a single sheet of paper on the kitchen counter. My mother's handwriting, always sharp and precise. The wedding is off. Expect a call from our attorney. We're pulling support immediately. Consider your choices. No greeting, no signature, just a decision delivered like a legal document. And for a moment, I just stood there, staring at it, not angry, not even surprised, just hollow. I didn't call them. I didn't reply. I didn't storm over to their estate demanding explanations. I simply folded the note, put it in my drawer, and sat down in the living room. Elise and I had decorated together. The truth is, I had known something like this might come. My parents weren't used to losing control, and Elise was the first decision in my life I had made without their input. She was my line in the sand, and now they were daring me to erase it. When Elise came home later that evening, she knew something was wrong before I even spoke. I handed her the note without saying a word. She read it once. Her eyes didn't fill with tears. She didn't panic. She simply nodded. "Then we move forward without them," she said quietly. And right then, I knew something they never would. I had already won, because while they were playing power games, I had chosen love. What happened over the next 48 hours would change everything, not just for me, but for them. Because I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to show them what real legacy looks like. And it doesn't come with a price tag. The morning after the note, I called my father's assistant. Not him. I wasn't interested in opening the door to manipulation masked as concern. I just said, "Please inform Mr. Reyes that he can direct any legal communication to my personal counsel moving forward." She hesitated. I didn't. The moment I hung up, I felt something strange. Peace. The kind that doesn't come from winning an argument but from refusing to be baited into one. That night, Elise and I sat down at our kitchen table and went through every wedding detail, not to cancel it, but to reshape it. My parents had covered the venue, the catering, and about 70% of the costs. With their withdrawal, we were suddenly under pressure, but instead of panicking, Elise leaned in and said, "What if we do it our way now? Not theirs, ours." And something in me clicked. This wasn't a loss. This was a door opening, one that had been locked with guilt for years. We started making calls. Friends, her sister, my best man. The moment they heard what happened, support flooded in. One of my college roommates offered to host the ceremony in his countryside barn, free of charge. Elise's boss pulled strings with a local caterer who offered a massive discount. A photographer we had originally passed on reached out, heard the story. "I'm in. No charge." It was humbling, overwhelming, and real. Every gesture stitched together a new story, one that had nothing to do with bloodlines or image. Meanwhile, My parents had gone silent. Not a word, no follow-up, not even the call from their lawyer they had so confidently promised. That was their game, silence as punishment. They thought I'd come crawling back to explain myself, maybe beg for forgiveness for disrespecting the family name, but what they didn't realize was this. Silence works both ways, and mine was no longer submission, it was sovereignty. Elise and I moved through the next 48 hours like two people setting fire to a script they never wrote. Every what now became what if. And for the first time I felt like a man, not a son trying to earn permission. The break didn't feel like betrayal, it felt like birth of something more honest, more enduring, more ours. 2 days later, as we finalized the new guest list, I received a message not from my father, but from his attorney. The subject line was short: revocation of trust allocation. I opened it, read every word, and felt nothing. Because when you finally found something real, the threat of losing what was fake no longer has power over you. The trust fund. That was their last card. The email made it official. The assets my parents had set aside for me in the event of a compliant succession were frozen, redirected to charity, or more likely held back as leverage. It was never about the money. It was always about control. And when they realized they couldn't bend Elise or break me, they pulled the trigger they always assumed would make me crawl. I sat with the document open on my laptop for 20 minutes. Not reading it, but looking through it. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I called my old mentor, someone who had offered me a partnership in a smaller but growing firm. Years ago, back when my father talked me out of it because it wasn't on brand for the Reyes legacy, I told him everything, not for sympathy, for opportunity. "You still interested?" I asked. He laughed. "I was waiting for you to be free." Elise watched me make the call from the kitchen. When I hung up, she walked over, didn't ask for details, just whispered, "Proud of you," and that was the only approval I needed anymore. Her belief in me wasn't conditional. It wasn't transactional. It didn't rise and fall with my bank account, that kind of loyalty. It doesn't shake when legacies collapse. It builds something better from the ruins. I formally declined the job offer my father had arranged for me 6 months earlier, the one I was supposed to start after the wedding. I sent a brief, polite email. "I will not be moving forward. Thank you for the opportunity." No drama, no explanation, just freedom typed in 12 words. Minutes later, my phone rang. My mother's number. I stared at it, let it ring, and when the voicemail came through, I deleted it without listening. The truth is, I wasn't angry anymore. Not even hurt. I had crossed into a space where their validation didn't touch me, where the weight of their disappointment felt more like air. That's the danger of emotional control. Once you lose your grip on someone's heart, they don't just walk away. They disappear from your reach entirely. I hadn't just said no. I had become someone who no longer needed their yes. That night, Elise and I stood on the roof of our apartment building with 2 glasses of champagne and a guest list cut in half, but twice as full. She toasted with a grin. To love that doesn't come with conditions. I raised my glass, and to family, the one you choose when the one you were born into forgets how to love. The wedding was nothing like the one my parents had planned, and it was perfect. We exchanged vows under soft lights in a converted barn surrounded by friends, colleagues, and chosen family. No designer champagne, no imported orchids, but every person there loved us without needing a resume or a bloodline. When Elise walked down that makeshift aisle in a simple silk dress, with her sister by her side, I didn't feel like I was settling for less. I felt like I had escaped a gilded prison. There were no photographers paid to polish our image, just one man with a good lens and an even better heart, who captured moments like breath, raw, quick, unforgettable. In one photo, Elise is laughing mid-sentence, hair tangled by the wind. In another, I'm holding her hand like it's the only truth I've ever known. That night we didn't talk about my parents once, because they weren't in the room, not physically, not emotionally, not in our future. But they were watching. Of course they were. A distant cousin who hadn't RSVP'd showed up quietly halfway through the ceremony and stood near the back, recording. I saw him. He saw me see him. He gave me a quick nod. I didn't return it, because the people who only show up to report, not to support, don't deserve eye contact. I knew that video would make its way back to my parents, and I wanted them to see it. Not to provoke them, but to let them witness the life they failed to break. 3 days after the wedding, Elise and I flew to a cabin in the hills of Vermont. No Wi-Fi, no cell signal, just snow, firewood, and silence. We didn't speak about inheritance, law firms, or anything with the Reyes name. We were too busy learning what peace feels like when no one is trying to orchestrate your future for their comfort. And for the first time in my adult life, I slept without tension in my jaw. When we returned, a letter was waiting for us. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. My mother's. It was short, cold, elegant as always. You'll regret this. We did what we had to do to protect you. You've chosen the wrong woman. That's all I'll say. I folded the letter once, placed it in the same drawer where her wedding cancellation note still lived. Not to remember her bitterness, but to remind myself that I survived it without becoming bitter too. That letter was her last attempt to rewrite the narrative. But the story had already been published, in the way Elise looked at me, in the way our friends toasted to us, in the way I no longer hesitated when I said no to the people who raised me. They thought they could cancel a wedding to protect their power. What they cancelled was their place in my life. Weeks passed, then months. No calls, no visits, just the occasional silence filled with the sound of their absence. My father, who once scheduled my life like a stock portfolio, had gone completely quiet. No ultimatums, no meetings, and that was the clearest sign of all. Not that they had forgiven, but that they were waiting for the crash they predicted. The inevitable downfall of a son who chose love over legacy. But the crash never came. In fact, everything began to rise. The new firm I partnered with offered me full equity after our second quarter together broke every projection. Elise started her own creative agency, built from scraps and stubbornness, and without planning it, we began to build something far more powerful than a business or a brand. We built a reputation, quiet competence, steady results, respect that couldn't be bought, only earned. One day, I received an email from a major investment firm my father once courted for years and failed to land. They wanted to collaborate with me, not because of my last name, but because of the work I'd done since stepping out from under it. I sat with that email open for nearly an hour, not to savor the offer, but to absorb what it meant. I had become the man he pretended to raise without becoming anything like him. Meanwhile, whispers reached me. My parents were embarrassed, not by scandal, but by irrelevance. The family name they had polished for decades was no longer opening the doors it used to. The people they once held over my head were now seeking me out directly, and Julia, the distant cousin, the messenger, told me quietly during a random coffee encounter, "They still think you'll come back. They think time will soften Elise or you'll hit a wall." I smiled. "Tell them I already did." And then I climbed over it. Elise and I started traveling more. Not to run, but to celebrate. Portugal, Morocco, small towns in Italy, places where no one knew our last names, only our laughter. That's what freedom looked like. Two people who lost everything they were supposed to need, and realized they were never supposed to have it in the first place. And yet, through it all, not once did I reach for the phone. Not once did I send a letter. Because some stories don't need a final chapter. They just need a clean break. My parents wanted loyalty without love, respect without reason, and silence without peace. What they got was distance, and the echo of everything they said I couldn't be. It's been nearly a year now, a full circle of seasons since I stood in front of that barn, holding Elise's hands and choosing a life that no longer needed my parents' approval. I wake up each day in a home we built from nothing, not brick by brick, but truth by truth. No inherited walls, no hidden clauses, just sunlight, coffee, laughter, and the quiet safety of being seen for exactly who I am. I haven't heard from my parents since that final letter. Not on my birthday, not on holidays, not when Elise and I announced the launch of our joint company, a dream we once joked about and now live in daily. Their silence isn't absence anymore. It's permission. I no longer look at my phone waiting for something redemptive to come through. I stopped writing stories in my head about reconciliations. They were never willing to earn. But here's the part I never expected. I'm grateful. Grateful they left that note. Grateful they drew that line, because in doing so they forced me to choose, and I chose Elise. I chose love, without conditions. I chose a life I don't have to edit for approval. And most importantly, I chose me, the version of me that isn't diluted by fear or expectation. Every now and then, someone asks me if I miss them. My answer is simple. I miss who I thought they were, not who they truly are. There's grief in that, yes, the kind that doesn't show up with tears, but with understanding. But grief isn't always a weight. Sometimes it's a gate, and once you walk through it, there's light. My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm 32 years old. I was disowned, cut off, erased from the future my parents tried to script, but I didn't fall. I rose. I didn't fight them. I outgrew them. And in the end, I didn't just walk away from a wedding they tried to cancel. I walked into a life they never had the courage to live. I didn't lose a family. I found my freedom.